Hello friends, and welcome again to a Walk in the Garden Bible study. Today we're going to be in chapter 41, and this is part 2 of chapter 41. And I just want to start off by saying, we started this project a few years back, and it's been an ongoing project. I said it was going to take some time. It's just an in-depth Bible study. I'm not in any rush or hurry to get through it. But here we are all the way up to chapter 41, and I've assembled quite a few followers since then, and about a year or two ago I decided to go global with my outreach. And so I just wanted to, I've got followers from several different countries as well as the United States, and I wanted to welcome aboard this last couple weeks the folks and the new friends that are following from the country of India. Welcome aboard. I hope you'll go back and review all of the videos in this series. You can find all of the previous videos on Facebook or on YouTube, and just look for a Walk in the Garden Genesis Bible Study or a Walk in the Garden Bible Study, and you'll find those there. So you can go back and review them at any time and catch up and start even from the very beginning if you desire to. You can use them as a devotional or whatever works for you, but it's been a blessing to be part of your family during this Bible study. So we're going to pick it up here. If you recall from our last lesson, we were looking at the case of Pharaoh. And we saw where Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, had a couple of dreams that were perplexing him. They were confusing to him, and he was desirous to know what the meaning was behind those dreams. And we talked about that they were divinely inspired dreams. And divinely inspired dreams can only be interpreted by God. They're given by God, and the interpretation has to come from God. And it either come directly from God or it can come through His vessel that He's chosen to reveal the meaning. And in this case, that vessel is going to be Joseph. And Joseph's been in prison for these past couple years, and the chief butler finally had it come back to his memory banks that Joseph would be the one that could do it because he interpreted their dreams, his dream and also the baker's dream, while they were in prison. And so he shared that information because Pharaoh had sought out all of the wisest men in his kingdom, all of the magicians, all of the men that he thought would have a possibility of giving him some explanation on his dreams, but none could help. And so when he caught wind and heard of this man named Joseph and the fact that he had that ability in the past, well, he was determined to get him to come and see if he could give him the answers that he sought for. And that's where we saw that he'd called him forth, and he brought Joseph into his council, and we saw that Joseph was careful to give the credit to God. He said, well, now I'm not going to be able to interpret it. I can't give you the answer you're looking for, but God will give you the answer. What did he say? He said, God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. Because Pharaoh was in an upheaval at this point. He was very agitated. He wasn't going to be able to rest easy until he knew what the significance of these dreams were, because he knew they had an impact. And anytime he would have a dream about something that was familiar to him, something that involved his country, and in this case it would not only involve the river Nile, which was the giver of life to their country. It was the giver of life not only for drinking water and for the animals to have drinking water, but it was also it would overflow its banks from time to time, and it would fertilize the ground, and it would give the ground irrigation. And so it was vital for the crops. Even if they didn't get the proper rainflow, the rain that would flow the rain that would come down in the mountain areas and the upper stream areas would eventually flow down to them, and it was the source of all life. So that was significant in itself, but also the two things that we're going to see that are most significant are the sustenance for the cattle and also the sustenance for the people. The two things that is basically giving them their livelihoods. And with that, we're going to pick it up in verses 17 through 32 of chapter 41. And here we read, And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, In my dream, behold, I stood upon the bank of the river, and behold, there came up out of the river 7 kine, fat-fleshed and well-favored, and they fed in a meadow. And behold, 7 other kine came up after them, poor and very ill-favored and lean-fleshed, such as I never saw in all the land of Egypt for badness. And the lean and the ill-favored kind did eat up the first 7 fat kine. And when they had eaten them up, it could not be known that they had eaten them, but they were still ill-favored as at the beginning. So I awoke, and I saw in my dream, and behold, 7 ears came up in one stalk, full and good, and behold, 7 ears withered, thin, and blasted with the east wind sprung up after them. And the thin ears devoured the 7 good ears, and I told this unto the magicians, but there was none that could declare it unto me. And Joseph said unto Pharaoh, the dream of Pharaoh is one. God hath showed Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good kine are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dream is one. And the 7 thin and ill-favored kine that came up after them are 7 years. And the 7 empty years, blasted with the east wind, shall be 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken unto Pharaoh. What God is about to do, he showeth unto Pharaoh. Behold, there came 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt, and there shall be arise after them 7 years of famine, and all the plenty shall be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine shall consume the land. And the plenty shall not be known in the land by reason of the famine following, for it shall be very grievous. And for that the dream was doubled unto Pharaoh twice. It is because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. So, as we talked about, this is a divinely inspired dream given by God to show Pharaoh what is going to take place. And God is in control. We know that God's created all things. He's in control of all things. The Bible tells us in Colossians that by Him all things consist. So not only did He create all things, but it is He that keeps things in motion. I mean, think about the earth spinning continuously for thousands of years on this so-called imaginary axis, because from a human standpoint, we don't know how else to explain it. I mean, how on earth can we explain a planet such as the earth, as large as it is, and basically floating on nothing in space, but yet it continues to spin at a continual rate of spin to where the seasons, the days, the very minutes and seconds of the day can be calculated. And yet you've got this humongous spinning object, spinning like it's on a timetable. It's on it's so organized that it's spinning continuously on a routine orbit, if you will. And then not only that, but it's orbiting the sun. And the moon orbits the earth, and it's just all of these orbitations going on continuously, taking place, without us even thinking about it, without us even giving it a moment's of thought. Because what could we do about it anyway? If we wanted to extend the day, or if we wanted to add a day to the calendar, or if we wanted to extend the nighttime, then we have no control. We're at its mercy. And some people want to say they're at the mercy of nature. But I don't think they give it any thought of the majestic organization of the universe. If anybody takes a moment to just consider the facts behind the organization and the timetable and all of the congruency between all of the planets and all of just the what we would refer to as nature, the way it all works together and functions together, then they would have to attribute that to a divine intervention, a divine being, and attribute it to the God of the creation. That's all you can do. But, here we see that God has given Pharaoh this divinely appointed dream, and that He's showing him what he's going to do, because He is in control of the weather. We think that all of these things happen from circumstance. We hear a lot of things talking about nowadays of climate change, and how that man is affecting the weather patterns, and how man is affecting this and that. And while all that there could be some influence there. There's no doubt that, if we introduce we can affect the imbalance of things just like we affect the imbalance of the animal populations. When we overfish an area, it can reduce down the fish population. If we overhunt a range, we've actually hunted some things in the past to the point of extinction. So yeah, certainly we can have a bearing on our environment. But as far as the weather patterns and the weather control, they've tried for many years to try to have some kind of understanding of the wind patterns and the understanding of the currents and the understanding of what forms a tornado or a hurricane. And yet here we are today, we're just as helpless as we ever were because we have no control. And as it was pointed out in the New Testament, only Jesus, only the Lord of all creation, has the power to control the elements, has the power to speak, and the winds and the waves obey his voice. But we have no control over that. And so we're at God's mercy. And we're always at God's mercy, whether it be in our health conditions, whether it be our daily activities for protection, whether it be encountering the weather or the elements. We're at God's mercy. And until folks realize that, then they're always going to be living in a life of fear and a life of confusion. So here we see that Pharaoh finds himself confused. He doesn't know. He doesn't understand. He doesn't realize why he's had these dreams. And so Joseph gives him the explanation. He says, Pharaoh, first of all, let me tell you that God is showing you what he's about to do. He's giving you some insight. He's giving you a chance that you can prepare properly for what's about to take place. Because he's going to show his hand mighty. And he's also going to show his hand mighty in me, and the fact that he's going to allow me to reveal to you what is going to happen so that it's going to you're going to have betterment for your kingdom as a result of this thing. And what does he tell him? He says that these dreams are one and the same. But he's doubled it up to show you the importance of it and how grievous this situation is going to be, and to show you that it was given to you by God Almighty himself. And the fact that, the 7 ill-favored kine and the 7 ill-looking ears of corn indicate 7 years of famine. And it's going to be a very grievous famine. But at the first, you're going to have 7 prosperous years. But after these 7 years of famine come upon, then everybody's going to forget about those good years, because it's not going to take long at all that everybody's going to be suffering for lack of livelihood, for lack of food, for lack of water, for lack of prosperity. And all that prosperity is going to go by the wayside very quickly. So the first thing we see here, and this is quite a few verses that we've covered, but they all are related verses, so we wanted to include that in one passage. And we've talked about some of these things in our last lesson. But what we've seen here, first of all, is that Joseph was, and just a reminder, that Joseph was finally remembered by the chief butler. And so he is brought forth. And he is called upon by Pharaoh. And what does he tell him? He tells him and explains to him what his dreams are reflecting. He says that first you've seen these 7 ill-favored cattle come up out of the river and proceed to the meadow, or the first fat cattle. The first 7 were the fat cattle, well-fleshed, very healthy, very good-looking, and very well taken care of. And they come up and they immediately go to the field and the meadow and they start feeding. But immediately after that, we see these malnourished cattle come up, and they stand very close proximity. They stand on the brink of the river. And then right after that, what do? They walk over and they proceed to eat up these fat and well-fleshed out cattle. And then that's when Pharaoh wakes up. He's like, what in the world was that? So he goes back to sleep, has this other dream, and basically sees the same thing happening with these ears of crops that are growing up there. And so he inquires of him. And we see Joseph here giving him the explanation. He says, the dream of Pharaoh is one. So he does that, and he tells them about and gives them that explanation. But the one thing we notice here is that the 2 things that Egypt were dependent upon for survival were about to be threatened. They were going to have bumper crops for 7 years. they were gonna, or they were gonna have the good, the rains that they needed, the water that they needed, the climate and the conditions were going to be ripe for having good bumper crops of the crops, and also with the cattle and with the livestock. Everything was going to prosper for that 7-year period. But then after that, it was going to be the famine. But the two things that Egypt were dependent upon, grass that the cattle depended upon, and the corn that the people depended upon. And both of these were going to become short supply. And we've seen that. We've seen that in our own country. We've seen that in other countries when things are going well and things are prospering, everybody's doing fine, and then the minute that a drought comes in perhaps, or some kind of blight on the crops, some kind of blight on the cattle, some kind of disease perhaps, and something that just affects the food supply. And it could be something that affects the food supply of the livestock, and then of course that's going to directly impact the people. But it can also be something that affects the crops, and that's going to impact the people. So either way, we're at God's mercy, and we should realize that we need to be thankful for those years of prosperity, but also be wise in our thinking ahead to possibly maybe prepare for the possibility of some years of famine, or when the weather, we've come up with ways of, maintaining, like out in the desert areas. They formulated great irrigation systems that come all the way from the coast perhaps. You think about places like Nevada or Arizona. And a lot of these places are able to do what they do, even with their population centers, for drinking water and other things, because of irrigation that they're getting from miles and miles away, perhaps from the next state over, like California. And they're sponging off of that. But if they ever run into a short supply, or they don't get enough snow that year, or they don't get enough rain that year, well then everybody's affected by it. And that's the way it is. It's like a snowball effect. But the good news here is that they're going to have 7 years of prosperity first. They're going to have 7 years of plenty. And then if they can take the appropriate measures of conservation, of storage, then they will be able to survive the distance and the detriment of these 7 years of famine that are going to follow. So God has revealed this beforehand to Pharaoh, and who, being the king of Egypt, that's like being the father of his country. And he can make, if he'll take heed to the interpretation of these dreams that Joseph's given him, then he will be able to make prudent and wise decisions to properly prepare to protect the people and protect the land. Well, with that, we're going to pick up the next verses here, and that's in verses 22 through 45. And here we're going to, or maybe I think it's 33 through 45, I'm sorry. But here we read, "Now therefore let Pharaoh look out a man discreet and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land, and take up the 5th part of the land of Egypt in the 7 plenteous years. And let them gather all the food of those good years that come up, and lay up corn under the land of Pharaoh, under the hand of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. And that food shall be for store to the land against the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land perish not through the famine, and that the thing was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said unto his servants, Can we find such a one as this is, a man in whom the Spirit of God is? And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, Forasmuch as God hath showed thee all this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. Thou shalt be over my house, and according unto thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne shall I be greater than thou. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, See, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand, and put it upon Joseph's hand, and arrayed him in vestures of fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck. And he made him to ride in the second chariot which he had, and they cried before him, Bow the knee. And he made him ruler over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without thee shall no man lift up his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath-Paneah, and he gave to him his wife Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, priest of On. And Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. So, Joseph continues here to give his advice to Pharaoh. I mean, he was just telling him, basically what he needs to do to survive. The wisdom of God has given him the directions to give Pharaoh in order to take appropriate actions to avert a national calamity. What does he say? He says, let Pharaoh look out a man discreet and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land. Well, basically, he's telling me this is going to require structure. I mean, you've got a big country. You've got a lot of people to manage, and you're not going to be able to do it alone. You can try to make proclamations. You can try to send out directions. But there's got to be some overseers, because when you've got this type of a situation, when people are prospering, well, they're not going to know any better. They're not going to take provisions. And then there may be a lot of non-believers out there. They may hear what's being told to them, but they may be like, well, I'm not going to do that. I don't, how does he know that? And, that's just the way it is. No matter where you're at, what country you're in, if the government or whoever makes the proclamations, well, if you don't have a management structure set up, then it's just not going to happen. You've got to have overseers. You've got to have governments. You've got to have, and that's why you got cities with mayors. You got governors of states. You got mayors. You've got counselors. You got, all of these different city officials, and they've all got their appropriate duties. But the primary thing is to make sure the instructions are being carried out. You've got law enforcement, and it's to make sure that the instructions that are set in place are being carried out. That's the only way you're going to have an effective community. And so that's what he says. He says you need to look at a man who's going to be in control of this operation, and then have him appoint officers over the land that are going to carry out his orders, and to make sure the people are doing what they should, to make sure the people are doing what's going to be the appropriate action, and to make sure these functions are carried forth and taken seriously, so that when these grievous years come, then you'll be able to have these things accomplished before that, instead of running around at the last minute and trying to get something in place. So it's going to require structure. It's going to require a hierarchy. It's going to require supervision. And there needs to be government oversight of the people, and the people of the nation need direction. It's for the good of the country, and it's for the good of the people. It's for their own preservation. It's for their own welfare, for their own well-being, which is what a government should do. One of the primary objectives of any government, if they're doing the right thing, is they should be trying to protect their people and to make them more prosperous and make sure their needs are met. And so he's telling Pharaoh, you need an honest and wise governor, one who is concerned for the welfare of the people, and who will put your kingdom first and foremost. And they need to be counted on. It needs to be somebody you can count on to fulfill this role as an extension, as an outreach, and then to use those officers to reach to the very limits and the very far reaches of your country, the very borders themselves. And so with that said, here's what they're to do. First of all, they're to take up the 5th part of the land of Egypt in the 7 plenteous years. And secondly, they're to gather all the food of those good years that come and lay up corn and keep food in the cities. So, having already realized the gravity of the situation, what was Pharaoh's response? Well, he was wise. He took it seriously. He says, it says the thing was good in the eyes of Pharaoh, and in the eyes of all his servants. And with that, he asked his servants, can we find such a one as this, a man in whom the Spirit of God is? Well, I would imagine not. I would imagine not. Not in the kingdom of Egypt at that time. I think Joseph was probably the only one, and he had just proven himself to be filled with the Spirit of God, and he was under God's hand, and he was aware of God's leadership in his life. And so Pharaoh felt like, well, if he's got, if God's using him to interpret my dreams, then surely God can use him to, with all the wisdom and knowledge to fulfill that role of directing my people. And I don't know if he'd gotten word from Potiphar on how well he prospered in his house, or if he'd gotten word from the jailer perhaps on how well he'd prospered there. I mean, it could have been. He could have learned about those instances and said, well, he's already proven himself in 2 different management positions as well, that God is with him wherever he goes. So it's obviously he's the right man for the job. And I think that's a good element for us to consider. Anybody that's any kind of a church official position, well, that's a person we want in that position is somebody in who the Spirit of God is. They've got the Holy Spirit, but they're used of the Lord. They're submitted to the Lord, and they're obedient to the Lord, and they've proven themselves in the past in different things that they've done or different situations they've been in for that to be the case. There's been witnesses that can attest to it. So Pharaoh really had no alternative but to give credit to God, to the God of Joseph. He had no alternative. There was no other explanation for it. God was going to get the glory. And his gods were powerless to give him comfort, but Joseph's God absolutely was able to accomplish that mission. This God had not only given discernment, but also had given him protective measures, not just for him, but for his entire country. So he's got to elevate Joseph to this position. And he tells his servants, since this God has shown these things to Joseph, surely he is the one we need. He has the wisdom. He has the ability. He has the talents that we're looking for. And nobody else has the Spirit of God, of this God upon them as Joseph does. Who in the entire kingdom would be able to lead such a monumental operation as we're facing right now, other than this Joseph? There is none, what does he say? He says, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. Wow. What a statement that is. What an accolation for Joseph. And that's coming from Pharaoh. And that word discreet means understanding, discerning, and intelligence. So he's really promoting Joseph and giving him a good accolade there. He says, Joseph, you are that man. You will lead my country. And in fact, it'll be to the point where you will be actually second in command. Only I will be greater, but only in the throne, only in my king position, if you will. That's the only thing. I'm not going to be doing any of these duties or overseeing. I'm trusting you to do that. But I will just be the head honcho, you might say, the one that's in the prime position, but only in name only. Because you will be over all of my affairs, and the people, I will see to it that they treat you like royalty, and that's the way it's going to be, and that's going to be my command. Well, we're going to finish out those verses there, and we're going to see what Pharaoh's final say is on the matter, but we're also going to see how he's going to justify Joseph, and he's going to make sure he's prominent in his position. That's the first thing he's going to do. He's going to establish his position and his authority before the people. Before any of this other stuff takes place, he has to get that settled, and we're going to see how he's going to do that as we finish out those verses in our next lesson. And I hope to see you then. I hope you're having a great day, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks.